Hello and good evening. And I never know at 5 whether it's evening or late afternoon. So as we're going to go past 6, let's start off with good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's question time. And we've used question time because it gives our youth the opportunity to ask questions of our not so young professionals and community leaders. So welcome to this session on how we can all work together to tackle gender-based violence. I've got a number of things that I will go through and an order at which I will go through them. But first, if I just introduce myself, my name's Gamil Yafai. I am a diversity and inclusion strategist, and I've been working as a strategist for 21 years. And you could say every part of what I do involves gender in some way or form. So I'm also a trustee for Women Leaders UK. I've been involved in, let's say, 36 pieces of research around the perceptions of different organizations or women towards different organizations and the lived experiences that they have when they're in those organizations. So gender equality isn't just important for me, it's part of everything that I do. And whenever I think about gender violence and abuse, strangely enough, I always think about my mom. And the reason I think about my mom, not because she was physically hurt in any way, but more from the mental side of it. I come from a lovely community called the Yemeni community, and we have our own customs, traditions, and practices like every single community that exists out there. We are all different in so many different ways, but we are all the same in so many other ways. But when I say I think about my mom, I think about the fact that at the age of just coming up to my 12th birthday, myself, my brother, and my sister were, taken on what was supposed to be a 6-week holiday to the Yemen, which ended up being 2.5 years. So my mom didn't see us for all of those 2.5 years. And I know that, when we got back, my mom was never the same, ever. And, that lasting impact was incredible. It's not always about physical abuse. Mental abuse, mental torture can have even greater impacts on people's lives. So, I was delighted when Afra asked me to chair this session, because I'm really, really keen to see how our youth are interpreting what's going on in society, and the fact that we're still talking about this in 2021. We've known all the problems, all of the challenges for as long as I can remember. We've known all of the solutions to all of the challenges. We just haven't acted in a way that could have resolved all of these issues. And I think that's part of the key to the future is moving from why is it happening to we know it's happening, let's do something about it. So yeah, I'm excited about this evening. I love listening to our youth, and I can rabbit on about working with youth forever. However, the way tonight's going to work and going to run, it is quite simple. We want it to be a simple event. We don't want it to be complex. We want everybody to be able to freely ask questions in the chat box, and I'll give you some sort of housekeeping in a moment. But it's an opportunity for you to get some of those burning questions off your chest, but also to hear the experiences and some of the from some of our community leaders of what they've experienced in their communities. So just going through some the running order. So once I've finished my bit around housekeeping, I'll pass you over to Miriam, who will give you an overview of Savera UK and the work that they do. Then we will go into some questions that some of our younger sort of audiences have already come up with. And we will get our community leaders and professionals within our sort of communities to actually respond to those. And then we'll ask some other questions that have been posed by other youth. And then we will open it up to the floor to take questions. But please, sort of, as we go along, you know, a number of real good housekeeping. One is please keep on mute, because it's incredible how many times we hear not just kids, but cats and dogs and other members of the family talking, which is great for yourselves, but does interrupt the conversation. You know, it's being videoed, so please bear in mind that, you know, if you don't want to be seen or you don't want your name to come up, please put your videos on on mute. I think the most important thing really when it comes to housekeeping is, you know, this is between us, but more importantly, you know, we need to be respectful of absolutely everybody. You know, even if somebody makes an inappropriate comment, you know, I'm not saying we dismiss that comment, but I deal with it and it goes away. But hopefully nobody will be silly enough to sort of use anything that's inappropriate, particularly with our youth in the room. So please bear in mind, you know, the audience that are here and are present. So for me, just coming back to the event, this is a great opportunity to actually have a conversation around an area that is very, very rarely discussed openly. You know, normally it's done in small groups or, you know, in different organizations or different departments, but this is an open event. Anybody's invited to this. So please bear in mind that you've got an opportunity here. Please take it. The youth that we have today are of varying ages, so please be mindful. And really, I think it's now sort of important that I have the guest speakers actually introduce themselves rather than me sort of do a preamble. So let's start off with David Della Freca. So David, over to you. Can you introduce yourself, please? David, sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, my name is David Darefaka. I'm the scheme manager for the Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic Community Development Service in St. Helens. We cover Halton, St. Helens, and Knowsley. And the work that I do actually involves working with partners to address issues of inequalities and discrimination in the way health and social care services are delivered to the BAME community. I'm also the chair of the Nigerian Community Association on Merseyside. And in my previous life, I've also been the chair of the BME strategy review group of when Kensington Regeneration, if people can think that far back, was in existence. So I've been involved with working with the community. And that is me, that's me.
David, thank you very much. Emily Spurrell, hi, over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me today and taking part. So I'm Emily Spurrell. I used to be a councillor in Liverpool, but I am now the new elected Police and Crime Commissioner for Merseyside. So I have responsibility for commissioning a variety of different services for victims of crime, which includes the wonderful Savera. And I also spoke a lot about tackling violence against women as part of my priorities before I was elected. So that will be a big feature of my work moving forward as well.
Brilliant. Emily, thank you very much. Kieran.
So I'm the coordinator of the Open Table Network, which is a partnership of Christian worship communities that welcome and affirm LGBT people, families and friends. For 10 years, I was also the coordinator of the UK's longest running LGBT youth group in Liverpool. And I've also spent 4 years as a chaplain to the YMCA, which included supporting women and their families seeking refuge from domestic abuse. Thank you.
Kieran, thank you very much. Kim Johnson.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Kim Johnson. I'm the Labour MP for Liverpool Riverside. Before I was elected as an MP, I used to work for Liverpool City Council and challenged this type of behaviour on a regular basis. And as a Member of Parliament, I sit on the Women and Equality Select Committee, and we have undertaken a couple of evidence sessions looking at violence against women and girls and discussed and debated domestic abuse and violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Tracy Gore.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to the panel as well. My name's Tracy Gore. I'm Director of Steve Biko Housing Association, which is a small black housing association based in Liverpool. We're a community-based organisation. I'm also currently on secondment to chair the Liverpool Race Equality Task Force, and that's looking at 5 key areas: education, employment skills, health and wellbeing, crime, criminal justice, and culture. I also, in terms of, carried out a lot of voluntary work, and I was one of the founding members of Amadudu, which is a black and other ethnic minority women's refuge based here on Merseyside. Thank you.
Tracy, thank you very much. Councillor Ranawaz Akbar.
Evening, everybody. Councillor Nawaz Akbar. I'm a Labour councillor for the ward of Rusholme in Manchester. I've been so for 12 years. Obviously, we know Manchester's diverse city, but Rusholme is actually probably one of the diverse ward in the city of Manchester. If you've heard of the Curry Mile, then you'll know where Rusholme is. I'm also got citywide responsibilities. I'm executive member for neighbourhoods, and until 2 weeks ago, that involved community cohesion and equalities. In my other work involves working with the Manchester Council of Mosques, which is an umbrella organisation across the city covering the 70 or so, mosques and Islamic centres, and I'm involved in a lot of interfaith work. Executive member of the Greater Manchester Muslim and Jewish Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Afra, as you're here.
Thank you, Gamil. My name is Afra, and I am the founder and CEO of Savera UK. And previously, I used to work in the NHS around improving inequalities for Black minority communities within the NHS. And I was the lead for women, children, and young people. I'm also currently the chair of the Liverpool Arab Art Festival. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for those introductions. So we've got a really good cross section of expertise, both in the community and supporting the communities. So before I move into the questions, I'm going to pass you over to Miriam, who's the chair. Miriam, over to you.
Thank you, Gamil. Hello, everyone. My name is Mariam Rana, and I'd just like to thank you all for being here today. I'm the chair of Savera UK Youth. We are a group of individuals aged 11 to 25 who campaign against practices of honour-based abuse, female genital mutilation, forced marriage, and honour killings. Joining Savera allowed me to campaign with a group of like-minded individuals and gave me a support network. Savera UK aims to change this by creatively raising awareness through our online platforms and use of various tools to create thought-provoking videos which help challenge the perceptions. Today's event focuses on the violence against women we have seen more recently, with the tragic passing of Sarah Everard. Although it was a case which gained national attention and sparked demonstrations and protests, the reality is that every 3 days a woman dies after being killed by a man. We recognise that not all perpetrators are men. However, 90% of women killed every year are killed by a male figure, often known to them as a partner, relative, or friend. With Britain being such a diverse country, it's vital that every person, regardless of their gender, is aware of the violence which is being directed towards women today. Events like today are incredibly important for sparking conversations and healthy debates and discussions. By communicating with members of the wider community, it allows for different viewpoints and perspectives to be changed. I would like to thank you here for your presence today and hand over back to you, Gamil. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've heard sort of intros from our community leaders, and we've heard from the chair of the board in terms of why this topic, as I say, needs to be discussed a lot more than it has been in the past, and why it's important for our youth to actually step forward and start questioning, our communities, our service providers, etc., and make sure that that we're not having these conversations in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. Something needs to be done. Otherwise, we'll just keep going round in circles. So, I would now like to, and if I find my lovely sheet. So, Kashkam, I've got the first question coming from you. Do you want to ask your question? And once you've asked the question, I'm going to let it to the the experts in the room to choose who wants to answer this question first. So, Kashkam.
Hi.
Hi.
How do you think the issue of violence and abuse can be tackled? And what do you think the most effective ways are? And do you think certain groups of people can face harmful practices more than others?
So we've got 3 questions there. And I don't mind if you take one each, or somebody decides they want to take all of them. So how do you think the issue of violence and abuse can be tackled?
I don't mind.
Tracy, thank you.
Thank you. Just if I take the first part of that question, for me it is around education and working with all sections of our community, but particularly with our young people. Education is key here in terms of discussing the issues, raising awareness, but to do that in a really different way, I guess. So it's not about lecturing people, it's about being creative in how we engage young people in those discussions. So I'm aware that a lot of the youth organisations today are actually starting to tackle this. They're tackling it from a variety of ways. They're getting group sessions. They're training their youth workers to engage with young people in very creative ways. And I think actually that needs to happen right across the city and the city region. And actually, this is a national discussion, isn't it? Probably right across the country. But actually, a real good conversation, raising awareness, educating our young people on violence and the outcomes of violence and the impact of violence. So it's not just about it's a wrong thing, it's actually seeing the consequences of those acts of violence. So for me, it is around education and raising that awareness and having those open, honest, real conversations, because it's only when we get it out into the light and into the open that we can affect change.
Brilliant. That's answered both the first and the second question. The second one was, what do you think are the most effective ways, and education being it? Open to others. Do you think certain groups of people face harmful practices more than others? And Councillor Rabnawaz.
Thank you. I think when we talk about harmful practices, I think there's a misconception, and like forced marriage and so-called honor killings. I don't like using the word honor because there's no honor in any killing. So so-called honor killings, FGM, are kind of for certain cultures and certain religions, but really it's not that's not actually the truth. It's not confined to certain cultures and certain religions, and we get it right across. People who are disabled, different sexual orientation, different cultures, ethnicities. But I think how we tackle that is, I think it's about working with those communities. When we talk about different ways, most effective methods, I think we have to work with those communities. It has to be partnership working. It can't be just the council, just the police or the public health. It has to be our social housing, our voluntary sector, work with those communities. And also, I think it's about having those honest conversations where we feel that is happening, having those honest conversations and making sure that those communities realize that is happening. Working with our practitioners. In Manchester, for example, we've got something called a one chance rule, where our practitioners come across where they feel there's a harmful practice. That may be the only chance they have to save that life, that one chance. So they have an obligation to make sure that that information is passed on, because if it's missed, in a way, we will never get that chance again. So when you talk about there are certain groups who face harmful practice are most vulnerable, yes, there are. I think some of those that are kind of subjected to harmful practice probably are the most vulnerable, because it could lead to a kind of fatality and never get that chance again.
Thank you. I've got David and then I've got Kim. So David, over to you first. And this is the gender issue, Kim.
I think from the way I look at it is that the community is very important in terms of how we get involved. We talk about community leaders. You rarely hear about community youths. It's not just about community leaders or community elders. Is the youth also getting involved in that process? It's also about actually tackling some of the value and belief systems that we have in our communities. We are talking about something that is in our community. People recognize, people are aware of what is going on in our communities, but no one is actually coming out and addressing and challenging those things. And what happens is that even if you decide to challenge them, you find people saying, oh, I don't want you to bring this thing out because it will taint our community. This is our culture, this is our values. Those are some of the things that we need to challenge. And I think one of the other things that I actually want to say is that when people are, or the victims actually bold enough to come out and speak out about it, we should be able to be there to create the environment, to create the platform whereby they are able to do that, and we support them and visibly support them. And I think the community has a major role to play in that, and I don't think we're doing it.
Yeah. David, thank you. I think a big part of that also is around psychological safety and what mechanisms are in place for people to feel safe, that they can talk and can be open. So thank you very much, Kim, then Afra.
Thank you so much. And I'd agree with all of the comments that have been made by the previous panelists, but I think we also need to be thinking about online abuse and how that is dealt with. It's very prominent at the moment. We know that it affects and impacts on young people's mental ill health. And I think that is something that needs to be challenged, though. Those platforms need to be taken into account. There needs to be, we do have online harms legislation being debated at the moment, but I think that's key and crucial in terms of going forward. And I think, because Cam asked about who was likely to be affected, you know, young men are often seen as the perpetrators of violence, and often they are the victims more often now. And I think that needs to be taken into account. Thank you, Camille.
Thank you, Kim. Afra, and then we've got Kieran, then Emily. So we're going around the houses.
No, I didn't. I was actually just applauding David. Yeah, applauding David for the comments that he said, because a lot of the times is like we're so afraid to discuss this issue within our own communities, and I think ourselves, we need to start discussing it rather than actually waiting for the local authority or the police to kind of come to us. We need to challenge it within our own communities as well.
Can I just ask, because coming, like yourself, coming from a Yemeni community, our communities are very resistant against any conversation, and they would rather walk away from you than have the conversation. What do you think is another way of going about it?
I think we have to be, I think we need to find those key individuals who really bravely to stand against those issues. And it took me a long time to be me as a person, because I made so much lies and so much why I'm this and why I'm that because of fear not being accepted in the community.
Yeah.
And it's only kind of in the last so many years that I was like, you accept me as I am and who I am. And me tackling those issues, I have a lot of questions, a lot of people thinking that I'm not respecting my own culture. But it's actually, I am actually more respecting my own culture because I'm challenging belief that these nothing to do with our traditions and nothing to do with our culture. It's a human rights violation, and we need to all stand against it. So I think that's what we need to break, those stereotypes and those stigmatize of discrimination, because our culture is so beautiful and we need to celebrate it, but to stand together against those issues.
I applaud you this time, so thank you very much. Kieran, then Emily.
Thank you. I think one of the most effective ways to tackle it is to look for common causes. So, for example, in my youth and community work, if I've been talking with people about challenging homophobia, biphobia and transphobia, then it's looking for common ground. It's not just about violence against women and girls, as serious and prevalent as that is. There's other minorities who don't conform to gender stereotypes also get impacted. So homophobic, biphobic, transphobic bullying is still prevalent. Homophobic and transphobic hate crime is still prevalent. And there's a lot of news and of case studies of people experiencing conversion therapy in the news at the moment, as campaigners are calling for a ban. So in my youth and community work, I've talked to people about challenging gender stereotypes and challenging sexism, because if we can break those, then that will make a fairer society for all of us, I believe. Young women and men and those who are not gender conforming are all imprisoned by those stereotypes and harmed by them.
Thank you very much. And over to Emily.
Yeah, I think just to kind of echo what other people have already said, really, I think it's really important that we be honest about the problem and the scale of the problem, and the fact that there are members of our community that will face it differently. So we know women will face huge levels of violence and abuse, but we also know that Black women will face even more. We also heard from Kieran, there are members of the LGBT community who will face digital abuse. I think we need to be really honest about the fact that there are parts of our community that see huge levels of abuse because of who they are, and it's really important that we acknowledge that and look to tackle it. I think as well, in terms of tackling that underlying culture, which for me is all about the misogyny. So all the issues that we've talked about, all the issues that Kieran highlighted about, attacks on people who don't conform to kind of what we might traditionally view as gender normality, You know, it's all around misogyny. It's all around kind of male dominance. It's about control of women's bodies. It's about control of people who might be seen as different from the usual binary way of thinking. And so I think we have to really tackle that underlying misogyny and make it clear that that is not how we want to live our society. That's not the kind of society that we want. And I think that's how we'll then start to try and tackle some of that violence and abuse that then emulates from that.
Emily, thank you very much. I'm a big believer that you work with those that want to work with you. You know, you can spend so much time trying to work with people that, you know, just won't work with you. But when you find those people that do want to work with you, those are the people that we need to spend the most time with. So thank you all for your responses. Kushkram, I hope that's answered your question. Moving on to our next question now, and Ilyas has let's see, a question for us. Over to you.
So a student, Sambakai, AOP Derbyshire, asked, what work is being done with the community, especially young women and girls, currently to make sure that they are safe and that they feel it? Additionally, what can community leaders do to minimize the risk of violence in their community?
Okay, who wants to start off there? Did you, Emily, then David?
Thanks, thank you for your question. It's a good question. So I said in the introduction that tackling violence against women and girls is a real priority for me. And I think it's something that hasn't really been given kind of the right level of weight and attention to this across the partnership. And, you know, it's the sad, well, the horrific murder of Sarah Everard that's kind of really brought this to the fore. So I think it's really important that we kind of take advantage of this kind of this movement that this has sparked, and really try and get some action to make this a priority and make sure that all of our partners are really focused on how we tackle this. It's a priority for me. I'll be working with all of the different councils on Merseyside to develop a strategy, working with services like Savera to look at how we can tackle violence against women and girls. What support do we need to put in place to try and keep people safe, so that actually when they do report something, they get the right support around them, and that at the same time the police and the other partners are really taking it seriously and actually going after those people who we know are causing that harm. I think in terms of community leaders, obviously Afra was saying before about the importance of certain community leaders speaking up. And I think for me in my role and the people I work with in the police and the other partners, we really need to be there to then back those people up. So actually when they draw attention to something, they say, this is a problem, this is criminal activity, this is not part of our culture, we will go with them and support them and give them that kind of support to try and make sure that we actually tackle it and address the issues.
Brilliant. Emily, thank you very much. David.
Sorry, I'm the chair of the Nigerian Community Association, for example, on Merseyside, and we're quite large. And I think a lot of the times when conversations around how do we ensure that our young people are protected and how do we ensure that some of these issues are looked at, and you find there are certain groups that say, well, this is not something that we need to discuss. This is not, it's not an important subject, etc. And I think personally, these are the sort of things that communities would need to work together. And I mean communities working together, because I chair the Nigerian Community Association. There are other community associations that are around, and I know that from these communities, we have this belief system, value systems that actually are oppressing. I use the word of oppressing our women folk. And it's not just the communities themselves, the faith groups themselves are also involved, because some of the teachings of some of our faith members are actually things that are actually creating these sort of difficulties. My thinking is that I think the communities need to come together and embrace and have this thing on their agenda when they have their meetings and discussions that they have. In my community, and I have to say that because I chair that, in my community, we are sort of disconnected. We have a disconnect with the youths. We don't actually embrace them. So they feel uncomfortable coming to share some of these issues with us because of the way a number of us are blinkered. We don't want to discuss anything to do with this. Oh, it's a young person. You mean you're not respecting? In fact, Afra said something about, if you say something, they say, oh, you're not respecting us. This is us. This is a value system. But I think it's about how we challenge that, how we embrace all of that, how we come together. And I think you said something about how we bring the communities together and actually start talking about it. It has to be on our agenda. It is something that has to constantly be on our agenda, not something that we come together as we are doing now to discuss when certain things happen. It has to be on our agenda all the time.
Absolutely. I think one of the things, sorry, anybody else got a, Emily, hi.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention something else in terms of how women and girls are feeling, in terms of feeling safe. I'm about to launch a survey next week to try and gather some of that information. So I just wanted to mention it now that, please do encourage, your friends and family, young women and girls to complete it, because it will really help us to know where those areas are where people don't feel safe out in the streets, for example. I know a lot of abuse takes place in the home, but we know there are areas as well on the streets where people don't feel safe. So we are going to be doing a survey to try and gather some of that information and make sure we're putting the right resource in place. I just wanted to mention that before I forgot. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing, and everybody out there, look out for the survey. David, just coming back to what you were saying about community leaders, are you talking about different African, Caribbean, Asian leaders, all leaders coming together and having do you have a network where you are, where all of those leaders, have the opportunity to talk to each other and to share experiences and challenges and opportunities?
I would say that I don't seem to have one. Not in Liverpool. I'm not sure of other places, but in Liverpool, I don't seem to have where the Nigerian Community Association, the Yemeni community, the various communities, and also the faith groups. And I also talk about the faith groups, the communities are also important, coming together to talk about some of these issues. We don't do that. We don't do that. I remember I actually got a post before coming to this. I got a post which actually was so offensive, where a man said, I slapped my wife. She took me to court, and I'm really surprised that the police came out and people were gathering to say, why did you arrest this man? And they posted it to me and they said, what do you think? And I said, why are you posting such things to me? You need to applaud the police of the woman for actually taking that action. But what the thought process is that is something that happens in our society. It's something that happens in our community. Why are you talking about it outside? Because in our communities, we're not challenging it. We're not challenging it. I keep saying it. We're not challenging it at all.
Well, I think that's a really good idea of getting, cross-section of community. Yes. I know the police will have their AIGs where they bring different community members together. But I know that where I live in Milton Keynes, and we have, I have a network of 40 ambassadors representing community groups and religious groups who come together to discuss the different challenges that they experience. And they give a lot more power to it as a collective. But thank you very much for sharing that. My next question is from Miriam. And, Miriam, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I will do. Thank you, Camille. I'd like to ask, why is religion used to justify harmful practices, even though most religions condemn them?
Brilliant question. Can I go to Kieran first? Kieran, have we lost you? I think we've lost Kieran for a moment, but I'm sure we'll come back to him. So, Councillor Rabnawaz. You're on mute.
I thought I unmuted myself.
You did, and then you put yourself back on.
I think our starting point should be there's absolutely no justification for any domestic or violence in our society. It's a criminal act, and that is our starting point. I mean, like I said, I've been involved in interfaith work. I don't think I've come across any faith or any belief actually, which actually openly states that this is the right thing to do, that, you know, violence, especially against women, is acceptable. And I think we've got to be really honest. I think this is men. I know, you know, violence does happen against men, but, you know, majority of it is men against women. I think it's patriarchal. I think men use religion, culture, tradition to basically keep their power over women. And historically, that's what's happened. You know, in terms of Islam, and Maryam, you're obviously of the Islamic faith, you will know our Prophet married a businesswoman. Yeah. And you know, in Islam, if a woman is earning, that is her earnings. A man, even if he's married to her, has absolutely no right over her earnings. Yeah. And that was 1400, 1500 years ago. And yet I think that's lost because men, you know, they don't want to interpret that. The verses are misinterpreted deliberately to make sure they keep that power hold over women. So I think it's just like we see people who kind of have an ideology that they feel that they can kill somebody after taking verses from the Quran and using them. I think similarly, I think it's men. Personally, I think as a Muslim man, I don't think we do enough. I don't think we talk about it enough. And we've got, when we talk about community leaders, over the last kind of 10 years, if I think about how many sermons the mosque imams have given on Friday on this subject, I can easily count them in one hand. And when you at the start said the statistic of how many women are harmed right across, that's not enough, is it? I think people are scared. They feel like they said they're tainting their own community. They feel like it's the wrong thing to do, but actually you're causing more harm by not openly discussing it. And sometimes when people do stick their head above the parapet, they're shot down by other members of the community as somebody who's kind of the black sheep. And I think we need to get across that. And one of the ways is, I think, it's education. I think when we talk about the new SRE syllabus, talking about healthy relationships, I think that will certainly help in school. A lot of issue was made about, certainly the Muslim community, about, you know, they're going to teach kids to become gay. You know, that was the sort of stuff we heard. We had protests in Birmingham. I think everybody knows about that. Yeah. I think we need to get across that these healthy relationships is going to have a massive impact on everybody, and certainly the issue of domestic violence against women.
Thank you very much. Kieran, I know we lost you for a second. I'm not sure if you heard the question.
So I have the question written down. It's about how religion is used to justify harmful practices. So I'm grateful to our councillor colleague for picking that question up first, because I wasn't here, but it's good to be back. So I'm aware that I'm representing Christianity here, but no one can represent one faith tradition single-handed. And of course, I'm not typical because I'm from a minority within the Christian tradition. But faith community, like almost any human community, we tend to be tribal. And at its best, that can give us a sense of identity and belonging. But at its worst, it can be them and us. Where some people get others and treated as less. So a good faith tradition, a healthy faith culture should be about transcending our differences and embracing the dignity of all people. And in my ministry with the LGBT community, we see that members of our communities are significantly more likely to experience poor mental health. And there's research has shown that explicitly relates to discriminatory pastoral practice in the local churches, and faith communities contributing to negative attitudes in society. And also the government's research shows that 51% of those who experience conversion therapy do so in faith communities. So there is a lot of work to be done to challenge that, to recognize that we should be recognizing and respecting the dignity of all people and challenging the inequalities on which that is based.
Kieran, thank you very much. Okay, Tracy, I believe you had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I had my hand up for the previous question. So I'll take that and try and respond to this as well. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was because it was talked about, the question was around keeping young girls safe. And I do go back to that education, and I'm aware that we've just recently been having a conversation with the City Council Youth Services, and they're looking to see how we can put on programmes for young girls in particular around their safety and support, and work with those young people. And it's not, it's actually not just around young people, because it's young boys who often become the perpetrators. So it's actually working with all young people, girls and boys, around educating them in terms of their behaviour, control and behaviour. There's a programme which is, send us a pic. People may be aware of young people who are being coerced to send, nude pictures of themselves. So it's raising that awareness, educating themselves, educating young people, both, as I said, our young people, all of them, on the issue. So I think that's really important, to keep them safe and to have a safe space to talk about the issues and to question them with people who are understanding their questions, and they're not meant to belittle them. And in terms of the kind of, why is religion used? I'm not a practicing, I don't practice any religious faith, so I'm probably not a good one to answer this, but I do take up that point, which is in terms of our religious leaders. They really do need to be addressing these issues, in their community and with their, their people, their congregations, as it were. They absolutely should be raising this issue and talking about it. And talking about it openly, really getting the discussion going.
Tracy, thank you. Miriam, I hope that's answered your question. I want to come on to Malcolm, and your question. Is Malcolm's
not joined us. He was the one that was a bit late, Gamia.
Hey,
Kim does have a hand up though now, so if she wants to.
Kim, hi.
And again, it was based on previous questions. Gamal be linked to women being safe, and today we've seen the Ofsted report about the sexual abuse in school, and it being kind of just an accepted norm. So schools have an awful big role to play in terms of educating and understanding, and particularly young men, in terms of what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. And I think one of the issues that we have is that teachers, unfortunately, don't have adequate training in being able to undertake these roles effectively, for whatever reason, and so maybe that goes back to how teachers are trained at university, and particularly, again, looking at online harms. And we know that there's a big issue about young boys using porn sites in terms of becoming familiar with what is what they need to do in terms of a sexual relation, and is not the most appropriate. And access to porn sites for young people is so easily accessible. So those kind of things, have an impact on how young people perceive, what is a healthy relationship and what isn't. But yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. Kim, thank you very much. And some real interesting sort of insights there. Kieran, I believe you had your hand up again.
Briefly, just wanted to add to a colleague's earlier comment about forced marriage. So children and young people's understanding of relationships and marriage is a factor, and religious communities play a big part in that. When I was chaplain at the YMCA, I supported a young woman in recovery from addiction who'd been taken in by a church community and ended up marrying another young man who was recovering from addiction. He turned out to be abusive and violent. The church leadership said, you have to cancel the restraining order you've got against him and go back to him, because marriage is for life. So, and that's a deeply toxic and damaging belief. And so when we were confronted with these things, we need to challenge them from within and outside of the community, because marriage is meant to be a mutual, equal, respectful relationship. If it's not, then we need to have the tools to talk about that and care for the people affected.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kieran. Okay, I believe Ilyas has a question from Naomi.
What are communities and religious groups doing to address the risk of abuse within their groups and services? And how are known perpetrators being tackled?
Kieran, do you want to take that as well?
I'll have a go. I think colleagues may also have more to say. So I think one of the characteristics of my community work is about creating safe spaces, because LGBT people have not always felt safe or included in faith communities. And for some, it's been particularly harmful, as I mentioned some research before. Yeah. And lesbian, gay, bi young people are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide, and trans young people are 7 times more likely. So that's at the heart of what the Open Table communities are about, is creating safe enough spaces. We also have supported people who have been perpetrators. And I know from my experience of other faith communities as well, that's about having a team around that person who can work with them and challenge them to call out inappropriate behavior, but sort of nurture them into a place of recovery, so that they are supervised and supported in a meaningful way that will help to break that cycle of behavior.
Thank you. Anybody else want to pick up on this? Emily.
Yes, I just thought it might be worth highlighting the work that's happening in Merseyside around harmful practice. So Afra mentioned before that she chairs the harmful practice group, which is a really good group that brings together Afra and many other partners to try and look at what we need to do to tackle things like harmful practices within and across Merseyside. There is as well a very robust response to perpetrators. I think we have to be careful sometimes about how we talk about perpetrators, because I think I remain at the higher level of violence and abuse. I remain skeptical of how much you can kind of re-educate somebody out of some of that. I think sometimes, you know, in my opinion, there's the scale of the abuse they've caused, prison is the best place for them. However, there is obviously a sliding scale. And I think, as Kieran highlighted, you know, we do need to look at what the underlying causes of some of that perpetrator behaviour would be. There was a very robust response in Merseyside around what we call offender management. So if we've identified people who are causing that harm, how do we kind of divert them away from that? Are there underlying issues that we need to address first? And that might put them on a more positive path. So it's about, I think, looking at the person in front of you and understanding what the right response is. But as long as it's being taken seriously and working with those victims and those communities to keep them safe as well, I think is that's the work that's happening here on Merseyside.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Tracy, before I move on, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add that in terms of, well, certainly from the Merseyside perspective, there's also the women's refuges that are there in operation, and I think in Merseyside they've actually been really ensuring that those services are still there. So, you know, we've had austerity, we've had cuts, but actually within Liverpool, I've actually made sure that those women's refuges remain open. So I think that's really important to say, that there are safe places where people need to go when they need to go. They are there available, and unfortunately they're in huge demand. And I say unfortunately because people shouldn't have to their home for places of safety. And the other thing I would say is that during this last year, domestic homicides, you know, that's murders and suicides, they've tripled, you know, during this last year. So violence, particularly against women, is really on the increase, and absolutely prison, you know, is needed. You know, if someone's murdered, they have to go to prison. If someone's seriously assaulted, they have to go to prison. But I actually do think that they need to be educated, because when they come out, they're still that same person, and they're probably going to be even more violent. So it's not one or the other for me. It's about, actually, we've got to do everything everything we can to work with those perpetrators to change their behaviour, because they very often go on to perpetrate the same crimes with other people, and we've got to try and put a stop to that.
Tracy, thank you very much. Kim, if we can be brief, we've just got a few.
It will be brief, sorry. Yeah, I think I wanted to pick up on what Tracy's saying about we do have refuges, but however, those refuges don't have statutory funding. They're constantly having to raise funding through charity and trusts. And so the government need to be thinking about how they put that on a statutory footing. And I also wanted to say about blame, you know, the judicial is run, unfortunately, by old white men who still kind of entrench these views about what women wear and what women shouldn't wear, and that blame culture. So that needs to change as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Coming back to Kushkan with the final question from the youngsters before I pass you over to Miriam with some other questions.
Thanks. Do you think violence and abuse has changed for this generation compared to older generations? And what can be done to further educate future generations?
Wow, really, really good question. I'm going to go to Councillor Renoas. So over to you first, and then I'll come back to Kim.
Yeah, it is a really good question. I think as we've been talking today, I think we still have a long way to go, but I think we have made some kind of we've changed in some way. For example, sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation of children, young people, and adults. Certainly, if you go back some years ago, I think we let down a lot of young people and even adults who were sexually exploited or criminally exploited. So certainly, I think we made progress on that, and certainly things are getting better on that. In terms of going forward, I think it goes back to education again. I think young people being educated at school, and I don't know, I think it was Kim, somebody mentioned it, our kind of teaching profession. I think there needs to be they need to be taught how to deal with this as well. Because certainly when I was at school, and certainly my children have, and my youngest is 17, my eldest is 33 now, and I've got 5 children. When I speak to them, this wasn't kind of something they talked about even in the PSHE syllabus. So I think we need to look at our curriculum and make sure that this is something that at an early age, at a primary school age, not when it goes to secondary school. This is something that, you know, SRE, whether it's about healthy relationships, it should be taught at that stage.
Thank you very much. So I've got Kim, then Emily, then David, then Afra. Kim.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to say, young people questions have been really fantastic today, you know, and got us thinking about some of the big issues that face young people on a daily basis. And I would have to say that, yes, I do believe that things have changed for our generation. You know, I've already talked about online abuse, and that is something that was not prevalent 10 years ago. But I also think that we've got more young Black kids who are being excluded from school, which often is a pipeline into prison, but also into gun and knife crime and grooming. We've got more young women being groomed by gangsters in terms of county lines. So I think all of those kind of things are, you know, far more prevalent than they were ever before. And I think poverty and austerity are a driving force for a lot of this type of action as well.
Thank you, Kim. Emily.
Yeah, I think echo what's been said. You know, we're much better at recognising it. We're much better at defining it. We're much better at saying, actually, this is not something that's just tolerated. It's not just a domestic. It's not something that just happened between a couple or in the house. It's something that we know is wrong, and we are much better at calling it out. So I think that's really positive. But as Kim says, you know, there are huge amounts of other challenges in the way that violence and abuse is perpetrated these days. I think when we talk about education, I think as well, it's important that we talk about empowerment. And actually what we want to do is to empower young people to know that this kind of behavior is wrong. So actually, you know, there's education, and we're teaching people about what a healthy relationship looks like, but we're also empowering young people so that if something does happen, they know it's wrong, they know they can report it, they know where to get support, and that there will be action as a result of that. So I think the kind of two need to go hand in hand.
Brilliant, thank you, Emily. David.
I think the difference is that we're talking about it is easily being talked about now. And I mean, it's raised. People are increasingly being aware of the issues that were perhaps in the past constantly particularly within our communities, swept under the carpet. It's coming out, and we're talking about it. However, I think for me, with the increase in social media and the prevalence of social media, etc., the new generation would be able to start to work and see that they have an opportunity to constantly raise this issue. And as these young people have actually done now. In fact, I'm actually really happy to be a part of this process where young people actually coming up and actually saying it and questioning, but it's also about the role that they have to play. I mean, coming back to schools, I mean, universities, etc., I think should be looking at something. I mean, I was looking at something before coming on the program with a recent Offset report about the sort of things around sexual harassment, where young girls, I mean, some of them are terrible things are being posted onto their WhatsApp sites, etc. So those are some of the other areas that needs to be addressed, and we need to be very clear about the policies and processes that we need to have in place to make sure that we are challenging those things constantly.
Okay, thank you, David. Afra.
Yeah, I think I'd probably just add to what everyone has said, but also in terms of the change, and think through that kind of understand. I think historically it was more of a physical kind of abuse. I think now it's becoming very kind of subtle, very psychological, emotional, that kind of blackmailing. And we're really, really important that we need to do a lot of education and awareness raising of how to recognize those abuse, because a lot of the time, many of who we work with, they see it as a very normal, or just, he has just a bad day, or, it's making those excuses. And I think especially particularly within some certain communities, because they see it as the very norm. And I think we need to recognize that it's not just the physical side of it. He didn't hit me, so it's all right, but he didn't give me, I'm not allowed to have my money or anything like that. So it's those kind of things that we really need to highlight. And I think those are the changes of the abuse, that it's more becoming rather than the physical.
Thank you for that. Kieran.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to briefly acknowledge that I think in some ways are getting better. So on the flip side of online abuse, we've got young people being able to find others like themselves whom they might not otherwise find, particularly around hidden issues like mental distress or sexuality or gender identity. And in the 15 years since I started working within the LGBT community with young people, you'd very rarely find a young person who was out in school 15 years ago, and now there are young people who feel comfortable to be themselves in their local community and in their school community. So in some ways things are getting better, and I thought it'd just be good to end on a slightly more positive note.
I think it'd be great to see more people coming out in sport, particularly football. And again, it's about role modeling as well. But listen, thank you very much for that. And thank you for those youth who have put the questions forward and who are here this evening. And it's quite brave to actually put forward these questions, very sensitive. So thank you very much. I'm now going to pass you over to Miriam, who has a number of questions from other young individuals. So Miriam.
Gamil, I think it would be the list that is coming from yourself. Okay,
so I wasn't sure if you were asking the questions, but no, I've got a whole list here, and I'm going to keep them short purely because we want to get some input from the audience as well. So questions from other young people. How can we begin to dismantle the patriarchy as a young person and create a more equal society? Anybody? Let's see, Emily, then Councillor Rabnoaz.
Yes, brilliant question. The fact that you've asked the question is the fact that you are already doing it. You are already asking those questions. You are engaging these processes. Just the fact that you know about the patriarchy is amazing, because it can be very complicated to explain to people, and people think you're just trying to blame men. That's not true. It's a wider societal issue. So absolutely spot on for just even being aware of it and challenging it. You just need to keep having these conversations. We need to keep talking to young people, keep talking to friends, family, raise awareness of why this is important, and what the impact is of the patriarchy, and just keep taking advantage of opportunities like this. You know, the young ambassadors as part of AFRA's and Savera's team are fantastic. So I think just keep engaging and keep doing what you're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emily. Councillor Rabnoaz.
I absolutely agree with what Emily has said, and I think as a society, we have an obligation to make sure. I know it's not just about men, but it is majority about men. I think we have an obligation to make sure we teach our sons, our nephews, our grandsons about this as well. I think men have to accept that this is a challenge. I'm using it, not the problem, a challenge for us. And the only way it's going to resolve, if we accept it's a problem and we actually help resolve it. It can't happen without men not accepting it. There are men out there who will not accept this patriarchy, who will see this as just norm. And what the young person has mentioned as talking fairy stories. And I think we need to change, men need to change.
Brilliant. Emily.
Sorry, one more quick thing I forgot to mention. I'm also going to be recruiting for a number of youth ambassadors as part of my office, to help me with some of this work around challenging the police, challenging all the various institutions around misogyny and hate crime and violence against women. So please do keep an eye out, because you young people are exactly the kind of people I want involved in that conversation. So please have a look and get in touch if you're interested. Thanks.
Thank you. Final response from Tracy.
Yeah, I was just going to add, as well as what everybody said, is that there's two things really, that, you know, keep challenging, you know, as well as raising it and having the open discussion. It's challenging it when it happens. So we all need to continue to challenge it. And also, I think we put a lot of emphasis on, you know, schools and community organisations and youth organisations, and I've mentioned them myself, but also our parents, and you spoke about it earlier in terms of, you know, we need to raise our sons, we need to raise our children, our women, you know, our young girls to not accept it, and our young people to absolutely not accept it and to understand it. But our parents actually play a major role in the way we bring up our children.
Fantastic. I totally agree with everything you've just said. So how can we make sure feminism and women's rights is intersectional and inclusive of all? A very, very good question there. So who wants to pick this up first? I'm looking at Kieran only because he nodded frantically.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I found a really interesting article, which I'm going to pop it in the chat because I think it's really impressive. It was from the United Nations Women website. And one of the things it says is those who are impacted most by gender-based violence and by gender inequalities are also the most impoverished and marginalized. Black and brown women, Indigenous women, women in rural areas, young girls, girls living with disabilities, trans youth, and gender non-conforming youth. So I couldn't have put it better myself. I thought that was extraordinary. And obviously, in terms of the stories that I hear, you know, with trans and non-conforming youth, there's a lot of transphobia and misinformation going around in the mainstream media at the moment. And feminism should be about celebrating the diversity of femininity and womanhood. And there are some women and men who seem to be reducing us to our biology and our sexual organs and not seeing the whole person. And that's causing great harm at the moment.
Thank you for that. There's loads of work going on at the moment about being human. And that is the appreciation that, you know, we are all human beings, we all have similarities, we all have differences, we are all intersectional in so many different ways, yet so many are treated so differently and, you know, in terms of disadvantage to many others. So thank you for that. Let me just come on to a question from Emma Coppard. pack. I believe it's COPAC, and I feel that the dialogue in the media around safety on the streets is often about what women should change and not what men should change. What can be done to alter this? Another lovely question. Afra?
I think it's a bit like what Councillor Rob Nawaz have said. I think it's about that acceptance that that men has to start thinking that the issue is not about how women need to conform or need to be safe or watch what they wearing or where they walk in, and having to worry about I think anybody should be walking, going somewhere is feeling safe. So I think men play a huge role in all of us kind of standing together, rather than actually this is considered a woman issue. This is nothing to do with woman issue. This is violence and abuse, and we all need to be honest and start tackling it all together to make the change.
Thank you. Emily. And then
yes, totally agree. It was really interesting in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder, where there was lots of discussion on social media and people were suggesting a curfew for men, and actually, well, maybe men should go off the street, and the backlash and the outrage just highlighted how much there is a disconnect between the life that women lead. Women have a self-imposed curfew because we will not go out after dark because we fear for our lives. And so the idea that men should suddenly do that was just, oh, that's outrageous. So I think we have to kind of turn it around. And you always get the response, but it's not all men. And no, of course it's not all men. It is a very small proportion of men that do it. But actually, we need men to be part of that conversation. We need them to get on board and support us. When we say we don't feel safe, they need to take control of that conversation as well, take ownership and say, well, actually, what can we do to help fix that? What can we do to put it right? So yeah, I think there's a bit of work to do there, but yeah.
A lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Tracy, over to you.
Yeah, I was just trying to challenge the headlines, isn't it? Because the kind of question is, you read in the media or see in the media, in the news, and I think it's us collectively challenging the people who write those headlines and read the news, isn't it? Which is about challenging the story. So the narrative should never be around the woman did and the women, wore or whatever. It should be about the perpetrator did and etc. And we have to challenge those headlines that come out all of the time, that challenge the narrative, turn it around back onto the people who are actually, perpetrating these acts.
Brilliant. And Councillor Rob Nawaz.
Thank you. I think it's not just the media. We've all kind of read those kind of judges' statements and been absolutely horrified when they've somehow blamed the woman because how she's dressed and this incident happened. Now, look, I think Emily will probably agree with me. I think the media is nobody's friend. They only are interested in circulation figures and viewing figures. And, I'm a Mancunian, but I have a lot of respect for the people of Liverpool, how they boycotted the Sun after the Hillsborough disaster, yeah? And I think the only way to send a message to the media is to stop watching their programs and stop buying their newspapers. That is the only way they're going to stop doing what they're doing. There's no other way to control them.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing that has come out of this is the role of parents, particularly fathers, in terms of role modeling, again, the behaviors that we need their kids to actually, to action on. So a couple more questions, and I'm only going to take a couple of responses for each because I really want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. So what policy decisions could be made at a national and local level to make our communities safer for women everywhere? Who would like to take? There we go, Emily and then David. So we'll stick to just the two. So Emily.
Sorry, I've got a lot to say about this. In terms of policy decisions, one of the things I will say, so locally, as the PCC for Merseyside, as I mentioned, I'll be developing a strategy to look at violence against women and girls, and I'll be asking all of the local authorities to have a really clear approach to this and look at what they're doing to tackle all the different forms of violence and abuse against women and girls in particular. There's also, and it's a shame Kim's gone, because I know Kim's been championing this in Parliament. The government are currently doing a consultation, they're doing a piece of work around serious violence. And actually they're talking about kind of gun and knife crime, but we need to make sure that violence against women, domestic abuse, sexual violence, that needs to be included in that definition of serious violence, because then we really start to open up the conversation around how all those forms of violence are linked and can actually start diverting resources and support to those victims. So really trying to make sure that nationally we define serious violence to include these forms of violence and abuse against women.
Thank you. And David.
I think there are. Sorry, have I? No. I think there are already these policies and strategies in place. It's actually implementing them, putting the necessary resources to make sure that those policies and strategies, because I know that there was one 2016 to 2020 government strategy on violence against women, and there are other things that are coming on. But it's actually putting the funds in place to ensure that these policies are actually implemented properly, and if they're not implemented, to ask questions why they are not, because otherwise we find ourselves having policies upon policies and nothing happens. Let us implement the ones that we have in place.
And we have too many policies as it is. So thank you, David. The final question from our youth is, is there a path we could go down to make misogyny, catcalling, etc. illegal, especially children in school uniforms, especially aimed at children in school uniforms? Emily, I'll come to you last. So let's see, Councillor Rabnawaz.
Thank you for that. I mean, in Manchester, we're actually supporting such behaviours as recording them as hate incidents, hate crimes. And we're working with the police and the mayor to do so. I know, and Emily might kind of probably know more about this, the National Police Council are looking at the wider implications of doing this. And I think that they're looking at a definition. And I think recently the Law Commission report highlighted this. So I think highlighting it as a hate incident, a hate crime, would dramatically reduce such behaviours, because it's not, like I said, it's not physical, but it's mental, isn't it? Watch what Kieran said at the start, and I think you said, Gamil, the mental abuse is just as bad as physical abuse. Thanks.
Thank you. And Emily.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I've been campaigning to get misogyny as a hate crime for a few years now, and I think in the same way that when somebody is attacked because they are gay or because they are black, we should absolutely acknowledge that when people are attacked because they're a woman, it is an attack on them and their identity, and it's very much based around misogyny and hatred of that gender. So we absolutely need to make that clear. There is some work being done in Parliament, you're absolutely right. They have now required all police forces to start recording misogyny as a hate crime. It isn't quite being given the same emphasis that other forms of hate crime are yet. They're still fighting that in Parliament, but police will from September have to start recording it. So at least it will give us an idea of the scale of the challenge on Merseyside. And you're right, there is a challenge around getting the definition and how do we define misogyny, but we're having the conversation and that's really important. And the other thing as well is there was a really great campaign around making street harassment a crime, because currently some of the kind of lower level forms of misogyny, the kind of catcalls, the wolf whistling, the issues that were identified, isn't currently illegal, and you don't really have anywhere to go to challenge it, even though it makes you as a woman and particularly as a girl in uniform feel incredibly unsafe. So our streets now, Plan UK are doing some really good work around this. If anyone wants to get involved, there's a really strong campaign to get street harassment recognised as a crime. So get involved, and you're welcome to contact me if you want to, or write to your MPs and tell them to get involved in the campaign, because it's a really good piece of work there. We just have to get the government to listen. Sorry.
Emily, some great sharing. So thank you very much. So you've got your surveys and everything else, so much going on. Thank you for all of that. So I just want to thank all of the youth, all of the questions from the youth, for being brilliant. You know, some great questions that have led to some brilliant, insightful answers and some really good sharing. I think now we need to open it up and to the audiences. And Nikki, I'm not quite sure whether you're going to give me the questions or send me some questions.
what people can do, if they want to drop a question in the chat box, then I'm keeping an eye on that and we'll share that with you. Or if you want to ask a question live, you can raise your hand and either me or Shauna will get you unmuted. But if we want to get started, there was a very good question earlier in the chat box from Amelia Williams, who asked, what should I reply when someone says, it's not all men, it happens to men too? And I thought that was a really good question.
Very good question. Who'd like to take that? Emily.
Sorry, I am happy for anyone else wants to
ask. Unless somebody else's hand goes up. So it's over to you.
I think to be fair, others have already commented in the chat, so they have already had a chance to say something. If they say to you it's not all men, the answer is we don't know which men it is. So until we can have some confidence to know who to stay away from, then that's how we approach that conversation. And actually, if they're asking that question, they're missing the point. You know what I mean? Of course, it's not all men. We know it's not all men, and we don't suggest it is all men. But until we know, and until we have a handle on how we tackle it, you're asking the wrong question and you're not responding to the concerns that are being raised by women. So that's the response that I would say. And I think, of course, it does happen to men as well. We know men can be victims of violence, and it's right that we acknowledge that and give them the right support. But when it comes down right to that very first question of, does it happen to more groups than others? Yes, it does. The scale of the abuse against women, the severity, the length of time, the way that women will be repeat victims, the patterns of violence and abuse against women is just huge in comparison. So it's really important that we don't lose sight of that. So yes, men need support, and it should absolutely be called out. And I would argue it's the same misogyny that we're facing that leads to some violence against men in some cases. Yeah. But we mustn't underestimate the scale of the challenge in terms of violence against women.
Thank you. And Councillor Rabnawaz.
I think if they're asking that question, they're missing the point. Nobody's saying it's all men. And I think they really need, it's a very narrow-minded way of looking at things. And I said, look, you've got to say to them, they are the problem. They do not know what a young girl or a woman feels like when she's walking on her own and behind her she hears a man's footsteps. I've got daughters, and they said, Dad, it's a horrible feeling sometimes, because you don't know how to react. You take out the phone, you pretend you're on the phone. You do things to try to make the other person think that you're talking to somebody. And so I think if anybody asks that question, they clearly have not spoken to a victim of violence and do not know what they're talking about. And I know it sounds harsh, but that is the sad reality.
Listen, thank you. We've got a question for our young people, so I hope one of you feels comfortable to answer this. So can I ask the young people what they think should be done to challenge and reduce VAWG? Can somebody please explain what the acronym is? Because I'm sure it's simple, but I've just missed it.
Violence against women and girls.
Thank you. In the home and public spaces. So is there any of our young audience that want to take that?
I don't mind.
And sorry,
Mariam.
Mariam, thank you very much.
So I think personally, obviously, I am currently 16 years old, and I'm a female. And I think that one of the most important things, especially for girls my age, is education at this point. I think often I'm seeing on my Instagram feed or my Twitter feed that I will often get sort of tips and tricks on what to do if you're walking on the street alone, or what to do if someone approaches you and you feel like they may be a threat to you. So I think that education for a woman and a girl about what to do is important, but then you've also got the education of men and boys. And I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, but they made an incredibly valid point by saying that it's young boys who also need to be educated because they will grow up to become these perpetrators. So I think that education definitely holds the key. And whether this be in schools, by teaching children what a healthy relationship consists of, or even programs which are run online. I think during the COVID era, we've seen how powerful online tools can be in showing that they are positive forces for change. So I think that for both genders, education is vital in ensuring that these mindsets are challenged and that they're changed, because these young children are influenced, and they can be influenced in a positive way. And I think that if we are able to nip these things in the bud, and if we're able to get to these root issues and these root problems, I think that they could be a real positive factor.
It's a great response. Thank you very much. Let's see, any other questions? Nikki, can you see anybody with their hands up? Because I can't see any hands at all.
No, there's no hands up at the moment, but there are a couple of questions just dropped in, so I will read a couple out. So I've got a question from Chloe Torkington, who says, as a community mental health charity, we would like to ask how we can support young people experiencing these issues.
There we go. Who would like to take that? Afra. You're on mute.
This mute. I think the first point of contact, if somebody comes to you, and I think as Councillor Abdul says about the one chance rule, which is how Savera UK also operate, is believing in that individual, believing in that young person. When they come to you, do not wait until a couple of hours later, or I'll call you tomorrow, or I'm sure you're just an attention seeker. Is really take their point of view and their risk and the concern that they have as a serious. And the first question you'd ask is, are you safe? How safe are you? Are you able to stay to be at home? If not, that's where you need to act straight away, and either contact the police or take them into a safe environment, and support them that way. And then once they're safe, then you build that relationship around their mental well-being, how best they can be supported emotionally as well as practically, because cases around honor-based abuse and harmful practices, that what we deal on a daily basis, that is the first thing, and that's what many young individual, by the time we get involved, is that one chance rule has been missed, and the confidence and the trust in services has been taken away, and it takes us so long before we can get that trust, and many of them get messed up because they'd rather be within that abusive environment, because they feel like, what's the point of me asking for help more than once, and nobody seemed to believe in me. I think that is the most important. Listen to them, really listen, not just pass listening. Listen of what they need and how they want to be supported and saved, rather than us making the assumption of what they need.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Tracy.
Yeah, just to add that, thank you, Afra, that was really important. Just to add to that, though, really was just around how you communicate your offer of service, so making sure that young people actually know your service exists, and so the communication strategy, make sure that it's actually aimed at young people as well, so that young people can know that they can come to you for help and support. So just checking where you're advertising your services and how you advertise your services as well.
Brilliant. Okay, Nikki, any other hands or?
Oh, go on.
Sorry, Shona, come on.
I was just going to say there's one from Lydia Williams that says, what can we as young people do to help make the discussion of sexual assault, sexual harassment, etc. less taboo?
Is that taboo to report?
Lydia, do you want to clarify in the chat, or do you want to pop up? I think she means as in taboo to just talk about.
Yeah. Who would like to take that? Okay. Afra, then Emily.
Yeah, I think from the experience that we have built within our young people and the work that we do, in school. It's about looking at healthy relationship. It's about what is a relationship, what do we understand about how we are respected, how we were dealt within our home, within our friends, within the wider society. I think that's a really important to understand those kind of issues, and make it kind of also given the chance to be the environment to be really safe for people to make mistake and to ask the question without fear. Am I offending this person? Am I saying this right? Am I saying this wrong? Is having that safe environment that whatever says, and we can kind of tackle that question to make understanding. I remember I used to be a youth. I used to do a lot of youth work, and one young person, he was I think he was about 11 or 12 years old. And then he came and says, "Hey, you Packy, what are you doing here?" And, you know, if I was that kind of ignorant, think how dare he say that, you know, racism was well. So what I did is just sat with him and I was like, what do you understand of that word? How do you, what kind of explain to me what you're understanding? And he said, he hasn't have a clue what that is. All it is he heard his family or parents saying it. And then once we sat and had that conversation, he said, "I promise you, I'm never going to say that again." And that's, I think, the importance of having those safe conversation and feeling safe to say things, and then understand them rather than kind of being shut down straight away.
Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard, and I don't think it's, you know, when you're challenging the status quo and when you're kind of calling people out on something, it is hard, and you know, you don't always get the best response, you know, because some people don't like to be told that what they're doing is inappropriate, so it is difficult. My advice would be to get a good group of friends around you who get it and who support, you know, the same kind of issues around challenging it. And actually, they're a really good resource. So I have a little WhatsApp group, and they're called feminist killjoys, because I'm always accused of being a killjoy because I try and call out people when they're being, you know, misogynistic. But actually, they're a really great group, because sometimes if you get a reaction from someone, you can kind of dissect it with some in a safe space, and they can help you maybe reword something if you think you might want to get a different response next time, or if you just need someone to reassure you that actually you were right to challenge it, you know, it's important that you do this, you've got a bit of support there. I think give yourself a bit of a safe space, so when you need to kind of decompress after having these conversations, because they can be really tough, you've got that support network there. So that would be my advice for doing it, but it is tough, but you're absolutely doing the right thing to kind of keep questioning it, and gradually it will become less taboo, but we just have to persevere, sadly.
Thank you. I'm looking at another question here. What would be the best advice on what to do when you see someone being sexually harassed? Should I speak up and tell them to stop, or will that get me in a bad situation? Have we covered that, or Tracy?
Yeah, sorry. I would just advise actually to go to the person who's being sexually harassed, and be with them and support them, and, you know, check that they're okay and try and walk them away from that situation, so that person's not left on their own, and the confrontation is not necessarily with that individual who's doing the harassment, because what you don't want to do is put yourself in, you know, in harm's way, as it were. But then if you feel safe enough and the, you know, the situation, things that you just say is not appropriate, you know, that you challenge it. I've actually been in a situation where I've actually seen violence, you know, a woman actually being attacked and whatever. And I was driving and I stopped the car, and I just got the woman and put her in the car and drove her, you know, just took her out of the situation. I didn't engage with the man. I just said, "Come on, you know, get off the street. I'll take you home," and got her off the street. I mean, I felt confident enough to do that, and you know, I could do that. So you have to do what's confident, you know, what you feel comfortable with. But I would certainly try and engage with the person who's being sexually harassed and move them away from the situation.
Thank you. Great advice. Councillor Rabnoaz.
Yeah, I actually agree with Tracy there, but I think also there are situations, and certainly I've come across one that sticks to my mind, where a woman was beaten black and blue, and when I got there, she would not say to the police it was her partner who did it. And so if you do see that, like Tracy said, try to approach the person who's being harassed. But if that person isn't actually not telling you, if they say it's fine, it's okay, but I think then you should go and tell somebody else what you saw. Because more than often in these coercive relationships, sadly, the woman will not speak out for fear of further kind of consequences, worse than what she's already facing. So it's about making sure, like you said, that somebody else knows what you've seen.
Brilliant. Any other advice before we move on? Okay. Nikki, anything else? Any hands gone up? I think we've covered all the questions in the chat. Was there anybody else?
Hi, sorry again. I think we have. There's a comment. It's not a question, but it is quite interesting, and it'd be sort of interesting to get people's thoughts on it. But Mandy Hamilton has said that I'm a police sergeant for Travel Safe Partnership in Merseyside with a team who police the public transport network. I also have 2 daughters. I'm assisting with a funding bid to improve the safety of women and girls on a safe journey home. Focusing on bystander training for bus drivers, bus station, railway staff, taxi drivers, etc., to recognise what support is required and how to recognise the vulnerability of younger women and young girls, as well as recognising potential perpetrators. We'll also consider CCTV lighting, possibly an app, and routes that people do not feel safe, so services can be more visible. Be interesting to see what people's thoughts about the usefulness of that and any potential thoughts on it. It was longer than I thought.
Emily.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, thank you, Mandy. It was really helpful to highlight, and I'm really grateful to see you're working on it. The government have introduced a number of these pots of funding in the response of, in the wake of Sarah Abroad, and it's very much around the infrastructure. It's not the kind of answer, I think, to tackling violence against women and girls, but actually things like CCTV and lighting can go some way to try and make the streets a little bit safer. So I'm really grateful that Mandy's doing that work, but actually I would really welcome, and part of the questions in the survey that I'm launching next week, we'll ask some of those questions around, are there any other particular areas, maybe public transport, maybe other areas where they think some of those kind of infrastructure things will be really helpful. So I'd be really welcome thoughts really from the panel and other young people in terms of where we apply for some of that funding.
Thank you. Any final comments before we move on? If not, Nikki, anything else in the chat or any hands up?
I'm conscious of time, but there was one thing I think, just in terms of Kieran raised, sort of, obviously the focus is on women and girls, but there are also a lot of other people who are at risk of these things. And I think the one, I read something a while ago about trans men and how they are, while they, obviously live as men and are, and sort of in appearances might not be affected, quite often it's forgotten that they have lived a huge proportion of their life as a woman with these same concerns, and these things don't sort of just go away, and it's very ingrained. And I kind of wondered what the approaches were around that side of things as well from the panel.
It's a shame Kieran isn't here.
He would have been good for this one. Unfortunately, I had another meeting, so.
Tracy, bye.
Yeah, I think for me it's exactly the same approach in terms of it's about education. I don't think there should be any difference. We need to be speaking about the issues, about raising the awareness, and education is key. It's about breaking down those barriers, breaking down those assumptions, and that it's that premise, isn't it, that we are all equal. Gamil, you said around we're all human, and we have different experiences, but we're all human beings. And for me, that's the way we should be treating it, is that we should have that same approach, and that we shouldn't be treating anybody any differently. It's about education, about raising awareness, and about challenging things and calling it out when we need to.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Tracy.
Emily?
I think just to follow on from that as well, I think when it comes to support for victims of abuse and how they've experienced it, I think this is where we need to look at the type of support that's available and making sure that we understand the specific needs. So what might suit you know, a cisgendered woman might not suit a trans man. You know, they'll have had those experiences, but they now are self-defining as male. So how do we make sure that there's the right provision in place for all of these different types of experiences that people are having? Because you do sometimes need, I think, a particular approach for certain victims. So I think that's the only thing I would say in terms of the difference, is how do we make sure we've got the right targeted support for all the different types of experiences that people will have had.
Fantastic. Okay, well, listen, thank you. I mean, before I pass you over to Afra, who will give you an update on what's happening in Savera UK, and then to Miriam to close, I'd just like to say thank you all for your contributions, the audience, the youngsters, and our professionals here. And you know, it's been, for me, every day's an education. And I mean, I've learned so much this evening, but three things that I am going to take away with me, and that is the responsibility of our communities, the responsibility within education to start really, really young and to focus on primary school kids, you know, but also the responsibility of parents, and how we get information to those parents, or what's information available and how we get them to those parents, are vital. So thank you all again. It's been a great pleasure. I'm now going to pass you over to Afra.
Thank you so much, Gamil. I'm only going to say a couple of words, and I echo Gamil of thank you for you attending and accepting our youth invitation to be questioned. I think, you know, our upcoming generation, they're the future, and I think it's really important for us to give them that platform and for them to actually lead the way, and hopefully, you know, supporting them to really tackle those issues from an earlier on as well. So for Savera, Savera kind of celebrated its 10 years anniversary last year. Sadly, we weren't able to celebrate it in a way that we hoped to do. But, you know, we've worked across communities, and we worked with professionals. We've delivered, you know, training across community as well as schools as well. So we've kind of, from starting this 10 years ago, when nobody spoke about what's the difference between an arranged and a forced marriage, and used to get me so frustrated when people use the term arranged marriage, which is a completely different to what forced marriage is. And I think just having those and understanding what actually is harmful practices and what actually non-harmful practices, and that why Savera is here is to kind of break those stereotypes and those kind of discrimination and be able to celebrate. And for the first time this year, we have developed our impact report. So it will be launched or coming out next week. So just wanted to see the audience, if anybody wanted a copy of that impact report. Hopefully it will be on our website, but also for people want it to be sent, I think Sean has just put there to just email our info email, and then a copy will be sent to yourselves. But also I would like to inform you of our upcoming event in July. The 14th of July is a National Day of Memory, to kind of have a reflection and have a thought about those who have been died or murdered in what we so-called honor, and it's actually a date on the 14th of July, which is set after Shafili Ahmed, who was murdered by her parents in Warrington, and this is an annual event that does on the 14th of July annually. So as part of that, we normally do an event. So this year we're having the webinar. As you might all be aware of the new law of domestic abuse, and despite that, we are welcoming that law and act to protect many, but sadly and disappointedly still left behind our migrant women and the issues of honor-based abuse and harmful practices. So that will be the theme for this year, is with guest speakers like the Nicole Jacob, who's the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, also our patron Nazil Afzal, who championed the work, and he's previously he was the Northwest lead of the Crown Prosecution, and also had a hugely championed women's and domestic abuse and harmful practices as well. They will be but also most importantly, we have survivors of honor-based abuse who are telling their stories, trying saying, if I tell my story, might help somebody who's in a similar situation. So the more we kind of share those stories, the more hopefully somebody there will feel less fear to come forward and ask for help and ask for support. So that will be on the 14th of July. So people need any information, and information will be coming out soon as well. And also not to forget, the Mayor of Liverpool as well has confirmed to be a guest speakers as well. So yeah, so it'll be a busy month hopefully. So yeah, so that's what I just want to say.
Brilliant. Now over to Mariam to close.
Thank you very much, Camille. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to everyone who has attended today. Today's event has been such an incredible opportunity for us to put our questions to community leaders. And as always, today's event has been organised and would not have taken place without several groups of people. We as Savera would like to thank the panellists here tonight and our wonderful chair, Camille Yafai. We'd like to thank everyone who submitted their questions and those who have attended tonight. A special thanks to the People's Postcode Trust and all our other funders who support the work we as Savera carry out. Thank you to the Savera UK team and board for their continued support. Thank you to Nikki and Shauna for their constant assistance and help.